All right, welcome everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome back after the abbreviated week, the prior week. We missed everybody. Let's just give it a minute here. I'll make sure that everybody can hear and see us okay. Do my typical. All right, welcome everybody. Oh, Monday. Welcome back. Who's got that on?
It's the 30-second delay, Andrew.
It is a 30-second
Yeah.
delay, so I'll redo everything in a minute so that it comes out. I forgot about that, Chris. I think you're the one that told me there's a delay and it ends. All right. Let's kick it off here. Welcome to the CyberCall. Good to see you all, Mike. It's good to see you out there. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend and had a great Labor Day. Today, we got a few things to talk about, some interesting stuff. Before we get into, today's topic, which is going to be on the evolution of cloud-based attacks. Got some banter to talk about. I always like to do that. So today we're joined in studio with some guest co-hosts, Chip Buck, co-founder and CTO of SaaS Alerts, Chris Lair, uh, um, famous incident responder, threat actor negotiator extraordinaire, etc. Phyllis Lee, as always, and our special guest today, MacKenzie Brown, which we'll introduce shortly. But Chip, let's just start off talking about this, and this is a free for all for everybody. But I do want to talk about the sales loft drift attacks to Salesforce because it is a great precursor to today's topic, and one that's akin to something you and I talk a lot about, which is in essence an OAuth attack, or not in essence, it was an OAuth attack, but man in the middle type attacks, because we talk a lot about the M365, man in the middle, token hijacking. This one's interesting in that when you look at what Drift does, it's an AI bot, right? That plugs in to your Salesforce, your website, and integrates with your Salesforce instance. How can I help you? Give you better customer service or increase your velocity of sales. So I thought it was interesting that, we have this attack from seemingly a state-sponsored threat actor, which would appear, it looks like a UNC 6395 is, I think, Russia. But I just love your take on this because we always have talked about concerns of focusing on AI, and AI attacks. This is a large scale credential based attack. What do you make of this so far? These are some very large corporations that got their Salesforce instances popped from this threat actor.
Well, my first comment is, you and I talk about this a lot on the SASE call each week. I know we've talked about it here as well. And we always make a point to people that while we are focusing on Microsoft 90% of the time, make a point of saying, any web-based OAuth type infrastructure is capable of being compromised in this way. And I think, and we specifically call out Salesforce and Google because there are two other big targets that could be there. So this is the first time I think we've seen it played out, so publicly and prolifically. It's an interesting twist to me that it's chat and going at chat. We're investing on our side in looking at deepfake hacks as well that can impact chat. So there's a lot moving. I think I sent you an article over the weekend, and unfortunately there was no backup data in it, but it was someone arguing that approximately 40% of nation state after attacks now are being conceived of and integrated with AI. So almost as if the article statement essentially was people are getting turning to AI for more imaginative use cases of the hacking tools they've already built. And I think this, this is potentially an example of that. And it's going to raise the stakes for how aware we all have to be. The black hat community is coming with all the tools in the arsenal, and I'm not sure that those of us on our side are reacting quickly enough to be moving toward AI defense.
What's interesting too, we're going to have one of the sessions at Write a Boom this year is going to be on Copilot security chip, and the lady that's going to do this, her name's Farah. She's phenomenal, and she in it demonstrates that she asks Copilot. I'm going to do a poor job, but you'll get the point. She asks Copilot to give her some confidential information, PII information, and it says, well, that's confidential. And the way in which she rephrases and coerces Copilot, it basically hands over a bunch of social security numbers. And so it is interesting how we're seeing this kind of focus, right, on AI and what it can do from a threat actor perspective.
Yeah, that one's, I've seen other things similar from people who are prompting Anthropic and Gemini. I find it interesting because it's real world examples of a human to AI social engineering attack.
Yeah, exactly.
So, is it any imagination to us that, or surprise to us that an AI is capable of being coerced through social engineering, since we all designed it to begin with?
That's really good point. Mac, you were saying when you just came on that this is something that you were just digging into a little further. Anything you want to kind of point out about this particular incident or incident?
Just some of the new findings. Of course, I'm sure you guys all monitor, which I find really interesting, the breach page actually that's out there. Drift breach, what is it called? Driftbreach.com, something like that. And it's tracking all of the main companies that have been involved. And this is also why it's terrifying, because the main companies are Google themselves and Palo Alto. And we already know Snowflake got hit before, but they're absolutely listed on this, which makes sense. But the new thing that just got posted again was that it kind of all started from just a compromised GitHub account. So on the research side of what we're doing internally too, and some of the cloud work, is using tools like Azure Research or Azure API research tools that create the output that actually can scan things like GitHub and pull out a lot of that information and data from public repositories, which is terrifying, especially knowing like if this resulted or patient zero was related to a GitHub account for Salesforce, a big company, right? A lot of these big companies, this is those types of hygiene related activities that need to occur on some of these easily searchable, very sensitive opportunities for initial access.
One thing that you did call out is these large scale companies. I'll try to find this as I maybe go over to Phyllis and get her thoughts. But one of the things Chip and I do talk a lot about is what good can come out of this. And one of the, I would say, good things that does come out of this are the kind of the gold standards and who communicates well in their incidents. And we always talk about, not that they have a lot of incidents, but when they do, Cloudflare, Chip. They were one of the impacted organizations. And what I love about Cloudflare is their no nonsense way of when they do have an incident about their comms, they basically flat out told everybody, hey, our Salesforce instance, it was our choice. We accept responsibility. This is what we use for support. And oh, by the way, if you're a client of ours and sent us anything about logs, configurations, anything, consider it compromised. So I'm going to find that,
and they went further and essentially said, even if you didn't, we recommend changing keys, changing access, reviewing all your policies. We've had several discussions about it, Andrew, just between us, and then a couple on these calls. And and compared them to the what not to do's, which I think are important as well. You know, we had a big distributor have an issue that kind of set the other bar, and I think it's instructive to look at both sides of that when people are thinking about it. Like, I don't believe that we live in an age anymore where a cyber compromise is something that people should try and sweep under the rug. It doesn't help the community. It doesn't help their reputation. I think everyone knows that all of us who are working in the field using technology day to day, we're all at risk for something that no one else has seen exposed before, and we can't shame each other. And if no matter how big or small your business is, this is really important for MSPs. You can't look at this as a shame thing. You've got to go to the community as fast as possible, seek help, disclose, and as Cloudflare has done, be completely transparent and over recommend remediation practices that their customers should take.
Yeah. Phyllis, any thoughts on this? And maybe just even if you could give back, maybe just kind of, well, one, are you anybody coming to CIS that might use this, or, and if not, your days at the agency when you guys are using enterprise-based tools, how could you see this going down, these days when, a lot of the federal agencies are using, these types of tools. What's your take here?
I mean, I think, it's interesting when you look at these kind of large scale attacks where everyone's kind of using, who isn't affected by Salesforce, right? Or something like that. And so again, it's in my opinion, a different aspect of supply chain where it's like, what are the suppliers that everyone is kind of dependent upon, right? And it's, and that's like these single points of failure, or it's like, the most bang for your buck when you're an attacker, right? That's why Microsoft is hacked so much. But, you're looking at something like a Salesforce that has such a huge impact across, DOD, the federal government. And this is similar, but very different than the, I can't remember it now. What's the, where they got into the compiler, and every major product was using.
Oh, of course. Log4j.
Yeah. No, it was the compiler one. I can't remember. Anyway, but it's like one of those things where everybody is using something, right? I mean, Log4j is similar. And so it's like, oh, we didn't know we had the strong dependency on this single thing. And then the widespreadness of that. It's in my opinion, it's a different way to look at supply chain. We typically look at it like, who are your downstream suppliers? How is it that they can affect your security? But then you also have to look at it maybe more holistically as, what is it that everyone is dependent upon?
Fair.
And how is it that going to affect everybody, right? Something like, a Salesforce that different organizations across different verticals are relying upon, and look at the big widespread impact. And, the federal government, more and more starts to worry, in my opinion, about things like that.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing these things that are just going across the whole federal government.
Fair. Chris, maybe just round things out, and then we'll get into today on, I guess, just our reliance on OAuth. And, as MSPs, we talk a lot about we've got 50, 60 tools these days. We are easy to click, admin integrations. We have a lot of automation out there now where we have a lot of, OAuth and integrations and things of that nature. What do we need to be thinking about in terms of, our hygiene with these things when you see, this, this was, in even this OAuth chip, I don't even saw too this, Chris, but they got into, it wasn't just limited to Salesforce. There were, Gmail credentials, because there was other OAuth tokens that they did compromise. So,
yeah, there's a number of different dimensions to this thing that I think MSP specifically can learn from. I mean, number one is Yeah, I mean, it's easy because you're walked through, or that's the step you have to take to provide credentials, and it's some type of admin level elevated credentials, and you do it, and you don't understand whether or not you have visibility into the use of those credentials or not, right? So, is that activity as an MSP that you can see, or is it sitting behind some kind of wall on the vendor side that you can't see? So that's number one. Do you have an inventory of this, and do you even know all the places that you've done this for every customer? You mean you've been doing it for yourself, obviously for internal purposes, but you're going to also be doing this on behalf of your clients as well. Do you have an understanding of where that is? And I think, you know, and I bring this up in the incident response kind of topic of discussion is, and it's the same thing I said, you know, in past sessions where we've talked about, hey, look, you may not be impacted by this, but you may have to take steps right now. Like, for example, we've talked about you have a client with 50 firewalls and you got to go update all those firewalls and roll credentials and do all that kind of stuff. That itself is responding to an incident. You don't have there's no evidence that a threat actor is doing anything, but you're going to have to respond in a very organized, planned way, and you're going to have to do it quickly, and you're going to have to do it in a documented fashion and all those types of things. So it's really, really important. I think this what we've been talking about today is a perfect example of where you have vendors that come out and say, hey, you need to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, and you need to do it quickly, regardless. And MSPs aren't prepared to do that. I mean, you know, like we had a previous session on the SonicWall stuff, and when SonicWall says, hey, everybody needs to go out and do this stuff, you talk to these larger MSPs, they have hundreds and maybe even thousands of firewalls they got to touch, and there really is no way to do that kind of transparently behind the scenes without any risk. So it's something that you have to be very cognizant of. And I think as we are adopting platforms and we are implementing platforms, we are not documenting them in a way that would help us in a response situation. And I think that's kind of the next big step that MSPs have to take.
Yeah, really well said, Chris. And I think, you know, to your point on, you know, if I have 1,000 firewalls out there, what's my, you know, scopes of work with my customers? Like, hey, I might have to interrupt your workday, like
Exactly.
for a while, because if I don't, bad stuff can happen, and we have to be on the same page about that in the era we live today.
Oh, that's
You know?
exactly right. Yeah, and you may have to collect, you know, you may have to collect evidence, even though no one's telling you to collect evidence, just in case you have to prove that it didn't happen to you. And that's what we're seeing as well. And the other thing to remind people is, in the grand scheme of things, in the majority of MSPs, you and your clients are very small fish in the sea with these vendors. So if you have a client that's 250 employees or 500 employees or even 1,000 employees and they're using Salesforce, they're not considered important.
Mhm.
And so when I'm dealing with larger companies and doing incident response tabletop exercises and stuff, the amount of money they spend with these vendors puts them at the top. So they're going to get the attention. You're not going to get that luxury being an MSP, and your clients definitely aren't going to get that luxury either. So that's another thing to take into account here, is that you are not going to be able to get those answers as quickly as you want from these vendors as if you were a much larger, like, enterprise size company. So you have to plan for that and deal with that. And that's a risk. And that's something that's not easily mitigated.
Yeah, well said. All right, let's get on into it. So today's topic is encryption to extortion and the evolution of cloud-based attacks. This is something Mac brought to me, some research she's been working on. She's got some great articles that she referenced in her research, one of which was a really big write-up from Microsoft, and we're going to be talking about that. But let me just kind of set the stage, and then Mac, I'll let you do a quick intro. So prior to Labor Day, Chris, we did talk about the SonicWall, you know, VPN. That was our last topic. We had Spencer, Pollock, breach attorney, and Eric on Tildes. We were talking about don't speculate, but to some of the points you brought up today, you know, you have something happened. You didn't necessarily plan on having an incident, but you're dealing, as you said, Chris, with this. So now, you know, as we transition to how threat actors are, you know, making shifts, one of the things is this mindset or this tactic of moving away, Mac, right, from ransomware and just moving into these cloud-based attacks, or from hybrid, from on-prem to cloud, jumping and doing these exfiltrations, wiping backups, and demanding the money through an extortion play. So joining us today, without further ado, and back with us is MacKenzie Brown, the VP of the Adversarial Pursuit Group at Blackpoint. Mac, for those that may not know you, if you could do a quick intro, and then I'll turn it over to Phyllis.
Yeah, MacKenzie, to those that don't know me, which many people don't know me too, so thank you. Yeah, true. But yeah, been at Blackpoint for a few years now and loving it. I run our adversary pursuit group, and we're pretty much the threat intelligence and threat research function internally to our threat operations, our MDR operations. So we feed and enhance what our SOC sees, but then especially on the topics of today, we monitor a lot of what's going on data leak sites, Telegram, areas that we can hopefully derive more ideas around changing or evolving techniques and tactics. And then we get to do the lovely thing of go out on our soapbox and be like, look at us, there's something wrong here. But yeah, former Microsoft. So, this was really good research of what we're talking about today. We were looking into it because of what we started noticing, a little bit of trends, especially in specific industries around ransomware, and the blind spots, some stuff that was not adding up as far as how ransomware is evolving, and it's straight to the data. So I love a good Microsoft threat intelligence bulletin. They definitely dig into it.
Yeah, you were at the DART for a number of years, so you have some firsthand experience. So Phyllis, I'll turn it over to you. Chris, Chip, if you have thoughts and comments along the way, please feel free to chime in. And Phyllis, it's all yours.
Yeah, nice to see you, MacKenzie.
Hi.
So, just kind of in layman's term or plain English, for those MSPs who want to talk to, a small, medium business executive, what is the difference between classic ransomware and today's extortion-only playbook? And why are threat actors like Storm 0501 pivoting to cloud, destroying backups, but not encrypting?
Right. Well, I think first and foremost, historically, right, we all know of ransomware as the encryption. It's disruptive, it's destructive. They put urgency on pain. In the past couple of years, we've seen this sort of transition into double extortion, where they focus on in that attack chain, which is usually what you can smell for a pre-ransomware attack, is they're going to your backups, they're going to where your sensitive data is, they're performing some level of exfiltration, and then they're deploying a payload. So while you're dealing with the ransomware in and of itself and getting a decryptor key for your actual data to recover and get back to business restoration, you're then also getting an email shortly thereafter in a couple months that says, hey, we'd also like you to pay us this additional invoice fee so that we don't release your data on data leak sites. And we started noticing this a lot with the Clop ransomware group earlier end of last year. And we started seeing at the beginning of the year, they were releasing, again, a list of organizations, which is very public. So in some of these cases, there was a trend for some of these orgs where they didn't report any ransomware attack. They didn't actually have a ransomware attack. And I think that's where we start to see this evolution that Microsoft was posting on, which is extortion only. And typically what we see too from cloud compromises is you have traditionally some on-prem compromise, and then they traverse into the cloud and look for that data and then be able to exfiltrate that data while also performing potentially ransomware on-prem. And so now we're seeing this evolution where, in my opinion, it's just kind of, they're still able to do a lot of things. They're still able to get very quick commodity or monetization off the attack in general by just focusing on the data. They know that they're going to be able to sell that data even if you don't pay into the fee. In these extortionware-based cases where they're simply just extorting you for access to the data or threatening to leak it, in some of the cases that Microsoft reported, they actually deleted the data So there's the concern there, but there's no payload, there's no malware required for it. So in my opinion, it's actually a much smarter way to go about it. And then when you look at a lot of the CLOP victims that were out and getting posted that potentially didn't even have a ransomware attack or any sort of encryption going on in their organization, they're concerned a lot to what Chris, I'd pull on the thread Chris mentioned earlier, is where's the evidence? So you have to do a response if you're listed on a data leak site, but if you don't actually know of any incident that occurred, now you're determined, well, were we monitoring? Do we have appropriate logging? Can we actually look back? And I see a lot of organizations shifting to where they're like logging, less logging, or more logging, but less retention for other legal reasons. They might not want retention. And as well, we know logging's really expensive too. So they're starting to be very cognizant of their budget. I think threat actors are moving into this extortion where, because it's quick, it's feasible, and we're overlooking the risk of persistent mechanisms that would be sitting in the environment in the first place. So they're having to go from who's patient zero, how did the threat actor actually get in, what did they do before they got to the data, destroyed our backups or didn't destroy our backups? How do we actually answer the question at hand? While also we have a week to go pay this extortion. So there's this like flavor of urgency that's getting pressed on them. They know they're going to have to pay, maybe, or not pay. They're always getting some sort of something back from the threat actor that's proving that this is valid data. And then they're concerned of who do they even call to do a response if the response could have happened at any point in time within the past 10 months.
So let me just ask this, if I could, Phyllis. Chris, A, are you seeing this more? And then B, how would you sum it up quickly? Because, you are doing tabletops for organizations. They pay you to do them. Mm-hmm. How do you synthesize this down as something an executive can understand quickly?
Yeah, it's so the problem is there are groups out there doing both things still. And that's the challenge. So when you talk to an executive, you got to say, hey, look, you see this one article and you might say, oh, okay, these guys are going after the data. We don't have any data. I'm not really concerned about my data. But there's another group that's working, that's there to disrupt you. So you have to be equally prepared for these different types of groups that attack you different ways. And sometimes you'll see a group that you might traditionally see do the double extortion route, but only exfil data. Or you might see where they didn't exfil data and they just hit you with encryption. So when you're talking to an executive, unfortunately, you have to tell them you have to be prepared, especially as a smaller organization, for these types of attacks that are going to be targeted towards you. I mean, the other thing that we're seeing, especially with all, a lot of these vulnerabilities that we've talked about in the past, let's just specifically say SonicWall, is where these companies just don't, these threat actors are not as consistent in their approach and their method as what they did in the past. So somebody might say, well, why aren't they negotiating with us? I thought this group would kind of negotiate and be a little bit more cooperative. And you're like, yeah, well, we're probably dealing with some newbie or some new person to that group or whatever. That's just different. So there's just a lot. So you can't paint the picture, unfortunately, is like, this is the new thing. You can say, hey, this is a new type of attack, but the other ones are still going on. And unfortunately, you have to be prepared and to deal with all of them.
Yeah, and lastly, Phyllis, before I go back to you, Chip, we also know that the research that you and I have looked into heavily is that these phishing as a service sites and basically ecosystems have made it so easy, right, for your newbie threat actor to enter the space.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a business model and an ecosystem that is not unlike any other business model or ecosystem, including recruiting people to come join the team and starting them out at a very low level. Your only job is to, get a hold of some credentials or even supply us names of companies that we haven't attacked yet or haven't seen. Just go and do some recon there and figure out what their account name structure looks like. Is it always the first name, last initial, or whatever they do? And so we can just start scouring. That's your only job. Just do that. Do that for a few months, and we're going to elevate you up to the next level. And we're going to gradually teach you how to live off the land and stick around and be a real malcontent. Like it's no different. It literally is a business model, and it's a huge ecosystem.
Yeah. All right, Phyllis, back over.
Yeah, sure. So you kind of briefly touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to circle back. So what do you think? Why do you think the attackers are evolving towards, just the extortion? Is it because of economics, like you said? You get a faster payday, it's cheaper, or is it that we are finally getting better at backup and restore? And so they're like, well, that's off the table now.
I hope we're getting better at backup.
I know.
And, our whole Azure Key Vaults and doing the right things. And I think we are. I think the problem is we're getting good at backups and restoration, but we're failing on the, not that this is a drinking game to say zero trust, but we're still really struggling with least privilege as well as backups and restoration. Or you make one change in your configs or policy and it ends up, because Microsoft loves to do this, and ends up ruining a lot of other configuration settings that are in place. And so I think people are thinking, okay, recovery is easier. We'll just do backups. And that might be a part of it, to be honest, is because they know that we're evolving. My concerns right now, especially when it comes to the cloud, is very much so the adversary in the middle, whether you have MFA or no MFA. What we're talking about with Salesforce of actually being able to manipulate application to application trust boundaries that exist, right? We're just unearthing one layer as we just solved one problem, and knowing that MFA, can be bypassed. You can do OAuth token theft. Like, you can do a lot of these activities. I would say it comes down to, it is economics and stealth. Economics, because regardless, they're going to find a way to get their payday. So this is sort of, and like Chris said, double extortion still exists, but stealth for the future of the extortion only aspect is if they're traversing into the cloud and focusing on things that are in the cloud, there's a high likelihood that you're not auditing or monitoring for those types of identity detection techniques and those privileged access. So then, especially if you focus on, we'll just insert some malicious enterprise app, or we're just going to steal just the right amount of credentials to get global admin. All of those go hand in hand because they're hoping you're not looking at those unified audit logs, or you're not looking at any of those logs in the first place. So stealth is helpful because there's a high likelihood that there's not going to be a lot of evidence, or they won't be able to work fast enough to unearth that evidence. But economics, it's a payday, right? They don't have to improve their customer service or tech support at that point. They just simply need to know, here's the link, you can pay or not pay. We'll find our money some way.
And Mac, Kim in chat asks, about strategies to protect. I think, we've talked about logging as a strategy. It's certainly one that when we talk about the cloud, is one that I would say isn't probably top of mind for a lot of people. Is that fair to say? And if going directly to his question, what might you recommend?
I think it's a little bit less so on logging. There are some default logging capabilities, and you can obviously extend those, and you want to do that. And it's more so the marriage between logging and monitoring, and looking for some of these techniques that occur. Because a lot of even what we see on-prem, right? We see, like Chip mentioned, a lot of the living off the land, the installation of things like PuTTY to normal sysadmin tools, everything that we're seeing that's on-prem, they've gotten really good at doing silent stealth and moving around. And so we're so focused on monitoring for those things, obfuscated PowerShell, right? To look for command line level logging, like those, that's what we've been focused on. And then in the cloud, when you look at the actual control plane takeover that's going on in the cloud, logging starts to get even more so. You're looking at who these administrators are, who these applications or these level of unrestricted access these tokens have. That starts to get a little bit more complicated. And that's why you need to have monitoring really married very closely with logging. And I think that we're missing the mark there a little bit.
Chip, you're big on behavioral type of analysis. What are your thoughts here?
Well, that's I suppose a more detailed description of monitoring. It's what we've built in our product, as you know, Andrew. we do ingest all those logs and are constantly scouring them for the analysis of what an account does. You know, we use the term behavior and we think of a person, but an account isn't a proxy for a person, even if it's a system account. And they can be observed the same way in terms of pattern detection of what they're doing. You know, whether it's bulk moving of files or whether it's, you know, dropping down into system level and policy controls, you know, all of those things are capturable in these logs. And, you know, we're always on the lookout to improve, you know, what we do with our product. But I think Max got it dead on. I mean, we have to continue to raise the threshold of how much information we're adjusting, how much automation we use to keep down the noise, and then monitor the activity of an account. You really have to think of every single account that's in, you know, in a SaaS or a cloud system as a potential threat. You know, there's no such thing. We use zero trust lots of different ways, right? ZTNA, and then zero trust for identity access management. It's also zero trust in what people do day to day. So and people, again, the proxy for the term account, it's a never ending battle, and it continues to just ratchet up with more and more information, which is good. We just have to build the systems to continue to stay out in front of that information and analyze it as we monitor it.
Yeah, I like that you guys mentioned the phishing as a service thing too, because we saw a lot of that in conjunction with the spoofed user agents. So they're going around and making sure, if you're looking at all of these multi-events related to one identity or one human considered account, they're finding ways to be able to blend in even more so that those types of detections aren't going to necessarily be at the top of the list that they're going to look at. And a lot of these tools, a lot of the phishing as a service tools are helping define sort of covering up their tracks through spoofing of those user agents. And then even once they're able to get into the cloud, it's that bulk assignments of role assignments. If they're able to elevate their access, they're now going to apply that same level of access across the board and make it even harder to detect what account is being leveraged. And to me, that's just the same thing as persistence in Active Directory, right? You're just opening the gates wide open so that they have to close them all down at the same time. But now they can just use whatever account they want to be able to navigate.
I have a follow-up. I read this morning that Okta said that they were able to resist the attack by filtering on inbound IP addresses to Salesforce. What do you think about that? And what do you think about that as a control? I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, I think that's smart. I think that's a good thing. I think it depends how many inbound IP addresses you're
right. I mean, I'm curious. Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, like, is that really a viable control, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I could say the same. We were talking about this way back in the day, not back, what am I saying? 6 months ago, it just keeps all the SonicWall stuff, like, right. All the SSL VPN compromise stuff. We're like, oh, what can you do? And you can give all the list of controls and changes and, you know, like identity and access level security controls to put in place. But we can even go down to whitelisting only these specific IPs that can only get access to your VPN service and then monitor those and limit them even more, right? So I think it's a term of like identity segmentation to a really granular level. But again, depending on the amount of IPs you're having to put in from an inbound perspective, I mean, I think it's a good idea. I just don't know. Chris might know what that workload looks like.
Well, I mean, probably some MSPs are going, because when we had those RMM attacks a few years ago, that was what people were doing. And they were finding, you know, some people had got somewhat ingenious on ways to do that. But other ones were like, my customers have people floating all over the place for me to keep up with that. But I think, you know, in the case of this Okta one, Phyllis, I mean, it's a good example again, where you probably had a large security team in place to be able to handle that, right? And then they probably had a relationship strong enough with Salesforce where they could say, hey, we're going to limit to these IPs. Can you tell us that these IPs are going to remain static and not change and all that kind of stuff? And if they do, but I mean, it's got to be the way things go, though. I mean, you have to learn lessons from these. I mean, if they were able to defeat this or kind of prevent it, that's a good lesson for everybody else. Now, how can you make that affordable for the masses?
Right. That's what I'm waiting for you all to tell me and solve. So
Well,
I'm waiting. V9's coming out next year, so I'm waiting.
That's the cliffhanger right now. We won't reveal it today.
Okay. Tune in next week.
That's
All
right.
right. So MacKenzie, Blackpoint tracked a 62% year-over-year rise in victims on leak sites. So, what does that mean about attacker capacity versus, defenders just getting tired of trying to defend all the time, defender fatigue?
Defender fatigue. That's such a good phrase. Yeah, I think we've been living in defender fatigue for a long
I
time.
know, right? I know.
Every time we have to do our IT budget, we're coming around for defender fatigue of what's most important. But I think it's a little bit of, I honestly, if you look at back in the Microsoft days, we were so focused on categorizing like APTs and nation state actors and ransomware operation groups. I think, and now we have this change where we're just seeing affiliate spinoffs, right? I don't really take anything seriously when the FBI is like, we just took down so-and-so again. And it's like, but they were just there in the news in a week later. So I think we have all of these affiliate spinoffs of other groups. And then you look at things like initial access brokers are still in there. There's still like these category of what they're good at doing, but the groups aren't necessarily just nation state and just ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're blending together and they're sharing a lot of resources. They're improving a lot of their, hacking technology or their tooling. I think they're finding new methods that are faster for compensation. And so, we're still heavily experiencing defender fatigue, but I think the problem with the threat actor ecosystem is they're just working better together, regardless of what their mission is.
And they're just recruiting more people to do the work too. So just more of them out there.
There's definitely an interesting topic that's been going on the rise, and it's on that hit is the insider threat risk too. I think that even threat actors right now are starting to look for fatigued defenders or fatigued employees that they can simply just grant access to and just leverage their account and get in, or have that person who has access to very specific data get in. But they're just looking for any initial access. And insider threats now, it used to be more like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't realize I was a risky user to that extent. But I think that's a really interesting rise of cases right now, is looking for employees that are easily manipulated.
Well, the economics have changed. When the attacker ecosystem is producing billions, hundreds of billions of dollars a year in revenue, they can afford to go to an individual contributor at a company, again, back to the distributor issue we had a few weeks back, and just say, hey, dude, they're paying you $100,000 a year, but I'm going to give you a $200,000 bonus in Bitcoin. Like that, that's a target rich environment. I'm sorry. Not everybody has the ethical construction to just say no. And the bigger the economics get, the bigger the reward gets for people to go ahead and succumb to an insider threat invitation. Let's call it that. An ITI.
I'll pile on there too. This is documented. There's less loyalty now between employees and employers than ever before. So you have the ethical side and you have the loyalty side, and unfortunately, those things just pay more benefits for the threat actor than us that are trying to be legitimate.
Yeah. In the interest of time, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Chris, for your questions.
Yeah, this is I'm going to throw you a softball one on this one, Mac. Beyond VPN creds and stale creds, what do you see as the most underestimated initial attack vector today?
I'd immediately say credentials and VPN creds. So you kind of gave it away there. I think what we see a lot of rise in, right? We talk about phishing, stolen credentials, basically any initial access to get in. But the Salesforce drift thing, the one that I mentioned earlier, is interesting. I think it's more on the automated tooling that we should be concerned about that performs a lot of that discovery and reconnaissance for us. Being able to scrape GitHub repos and just look for credentials, or go and pay for credentials, which are readily sold. I think that is something that's concerning. And then you have to look at, okay, so if they have these credentials that immediately access the cloud or some sort of web application, now we're looking at, for initial access and not just VPN, is anything that's considered elevated access just by compromising the system itself, whether it's a web app or an externally facing system, is looking for vulnerabilities. And we talk about this all the time. I'm sure we're tired of talking about this. But I mean, that's probably the next initial attack vector that's ripe, is just simply looking for the systems that are already vulnerable and exploiting those to gain access and then dumping the creds from those systems.
Yeah, it's easy pickings. That's just the bottom line. It's too easy.
But phishing is still very successful. Clearly, it's working.
I mean, that's what we saw in the sales loft, right, Mac? Though it was just a huge credential dump. So,
yeah, I mean, they have plenty of time on their hands to go do the work. I mean, that's the difference. These guys don't have a 8 to 5 job. They can work 18, 19, 20 hours a day and hand it over to some other guy to get this stuff done. Next thing. So walk us through this Storm 0501. I mean, they used Evil Win RM and DC Sync, and then they abused Entra Connect Sync to map out that these cloud identities. So where should the detection trip first in this particular situation?
Feels like a math problem. If the train is going 100 miles per hour,
that's exactly right.
That's what it feels like.
You thought this was going to be easy.
Vegas again, Chris, and you're gonna be like, here you have $100 to go play on the slots. If this guy's watching you and coming in, what's the probability he's gonna take your money?
At 3 o'clock in the morning.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, probability was high, very high. So, I mean, the easy answer would be detection would start on-prem, right? We would be looking for something like the DC Sync attack. Any sort of Active Directory enumeration, any sort of hits against accounts that would have access to the identity plane, that would be ideal. And what we did see that I find, I mean, we only had a couple cases that did this, but it was starting at the cloud and then moved on-prem. So we had that one Intune abuse case that I beat like a dead horse on the road for a while because it was so interesting. But they compromised privileged access in the cloud and used Intune to deploy Redline Stealer all on-prem. So I do, but traditionally, yes, on-prem, moving to the cloud. So you'd want to detect a lot of these activities on-prem. And then what Chip was saying earlier too, that's where a lot of our noise comes in, because they're using more living off the land techniques. They're installing very normal tools. This is like, okay, well, what's the best detection at that? Managed application controller, application control to some extent. What tools are they using? Doing some sort of command line logging to be able to look for potential sus activities through PowerShell. Being able to just look for living off the land on-prem, let alone looking for things that hit Active Directory like a DC Sync attack. So that's where I would say would trip sooner. But I also think threat actors note that. And then, of course, any activity, I don't know if it would trip sooner, but any activity that's going to hit vaults, key vaults, management systems, certificate systems, your backups, any sort of storage that you have and what those accounts are doing. If you can create any sort of detections, those accounts should have the least amount of access in many cases and as much least privilege applied as possible, and those users that use those accounts. So those are, but that would be probably, if those are getting hit, then your trip was a little too late, I'm afraid.
But should so you mentioned that though, but something like that, like Chip, should we still think honeypots if that could be a last resort to what Mac was saying?
I mean, we certainly could. Chris's question inspired me to ask a follow-up, actually, and I'd love Mac's comment on it. When it comes to ADFS, when it comes to local infrastructure DCs synchronizing, it seems to me, I've had this thought for a long time. I brought it up on our other calls, Andrew, that smaller organizations don't have any business there. Like if there's not really a significant need with multi-domain infrastructure that's all tied together, most of the customers of MSPs, the MSP should be telling them, absolutely not. This is not a secure way to support you. You need to be tearing this out. It's only meant for migration, and then get rid of it.
Yep. I think, well, we saw the ADFS stuff specifically too around the SolarWinds breach. I can't get on a call and not talk about that, but they targeted ADFS because we were doing a lot of piss poor management on the hygiene side of what type of information is stored in ADFS too. If you can hit that system in general, and then you've automatically been able to elevate your privilege very quickly to be able to get what you want done with minimal noise. But I would agree. And it's sad when we're sitting here talking about we're not doing the cloud right. We're not securing the cloud right. We're not monitoring and logging the cloud correctly, but then say, but you should move 100% to the cloud, because on-prem, to me, if you have a hybrid environment, you already have a larger attack surface than just being all on-prem or all in the cloud.
Yep.
So I definitely agree on that.
So-
we need to push
so-
small business to the cloud.
Speed round question: between 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000, what's the smallest size organization that could legitimately benefit from ADFS?
Yeah, I don't think anyone benefits from ADFS. Yeah.
Especially today.
That's an even better answer.
Yeah,
I love it.
especially today.
That's fine. I don't think anyone benefits. Trick question.
Okay.
No one's really
Well,
benefiting.
that's actually the perfect answer. Sorry,
Yeah.
Chris.
No, that's all good. I want to get over to Chip's question. So I just have one more for you for the Azure data store side of things. Adversaries, they flip public access, they dump list keys, and they use AZ copy.
Yes.
What are your top 3 to stop exfiltration? Immutability, private endpoints, key governance, anything else in there you want to add on there?
Immutability. I mean, we talk about immutable storage all the time, right? So it's one thing you recommend, regardless if you're talking cloud and on-prem too. I mean, we got to the point at Dart where we even included in some of our recommendations of like, well, you should also consider not just immutable storage, but so like offline backups of certain systems, right? Like we were pushing it so far to say recovery is your security, because clearly monitoring a response failed and all the security controls failed at some point. And so focusing on your restoration capability. So immutable storage, I talked about too, when it comes to the cloud, like that one tool, the Azure API research tool, and my researcher was kind of showing me the output of it. And it's also understanding the one of the output pieces of output within it, categories is endpoints and hidden endpoints. So it's also looking for private endpoints. That's going to be really dangerous, because those are the ones that are going to be the most effective at exfiltration, because it's going to be an unknown IP address that's already been set up within your virtual environment. And so looking for some of those, I mean, back in on-prem world, unmanaged devices, right? Hidden endpoints, workstations that are going to be that tunnel that they need to be able to using. So be able to stop data exfiltration it'll come down to a lot of auditing, of not just auditing the accounts that have that capability, putting in some sort of application control of things like rclone and megasync, right? Things that do that activity. Also monitor for attempted use of those tools, but look for some of those private endpoints, look some of those unknown workstations, those unknown accounts and identities that can have the ability to exfiltrate information and tunnel it out to an unknown or unknown IP address. But other than that, immutable storage, protecting Azure Key Vault, putting in layers upon layers of role-based access control.
Yep. All right. It's all over to you, Chip.
So, Mac, when we're talking about the scenarios where there's mass deletion on snapshots, restore points, storage accounts, probably preceded by exfiltration, what kind of resource lock and policies can people employ that are going to survive that?
There's many Azure resource locks that you can probably focus on, but cannot delete, read only, putting in the ability for someone to delete something. And you can even do this, I believe, for like the global admin side, but and the extortionware topic's a good example. And honestly, the Salesforce drift stuff, because what we saw is they were going in and deleting some of the, like the query. Oh, I'd have to look it up. They were deleting the actual footprints where they were querying the storage in general. So they were even deleting those before they exfiltrated the information. But if you can't even delete or modify recovery, even at a global admin level, and you've put in that granular level of capabilities, even if you're the domain admin of the cloud, even if you're one top type of role that can do absolutely everything, but yet you can put in granular specifications of what they can't do, just make them not be able to delete it in the first place. Exfiltration, right? That's a different story. That's a different type of playbook where you're going to have to catch and respond on. But if they delete the information, like in these extortionware cases, you're kind of like pigeonholed into your only one option is to retrieve the data as pain on top of all the PR that you're going to have to do for the extortion itself.
Yep, makes sense. You mentioned the living off the land, the R clones, the mega sinks in the last reply to Chris. Do you have concerns that increased monitoring is going to produce a data fatigue, a false positive fatigue, in that realm, and any thoughts on how to handle that?
Yeah, I do think our defender fatigue, that needs to be like a patch or a badge we put on our things. But yeah, absolutely. I think, we're asking to say, hey, these are the ways that threat actors are navigating your system, but then you're auditing all of the logs related to privileged accounts. You're now auditing all of the cloud logs related to any sort of service account or something that's going to have high access to things. And then now you're doing command line logging, right? Like that's a lot. And we used to recommend that a lot in some of our debriefings after an incident. We'd say like, hey, you should actually log and monitor for PowerShell activity and see what's going on. But that can be, especially depending on the size of the organization, that's a lot of information. And then especially when you don't have a baseline of what's considered normal from a behavior analytics side. So you're already looking for all these other types of detection engineering opportunities you have to put in, let alone that's a lot of noise. And I think, the best way to do it would be some sort of user behavior analytics, UEBAB, whatever tool to have that in place to actually monitor for. You're going to have a false positive rate that's high regardless. But if you can put in some sort of solution or tool that focuses on user behavior analytics, at least you filter out some of the low-hanging fruit low-hanging types of fruits that you need to target and be able to say, do some sort of verification or validation on the activity.
So if you're thinking about maybe an MSP in this call that's just really beginning this journey or subway mid-journey, and they're really starting to think about exfiltration, what are your top 3 or 5 or 2 or 3, however you want to put it, controls that they should be really aggressively going after right now? Let's just pause it for a second that they haven't started this journey with their customers, but now they're eager to.
Well, first and foremost, definitely what we've been talking about is building in a strong business continuity, a BCDR plan, right? Like putting in something that's going to be focused on backups and restoration, but also the underlining process of it, because that underlining process is also going to give you that little racy matrix of what accounts and users have the ability to do restoration. And then also limiting those types of accounts that are shared between the people that do restoration, but also work in a production environment and also make updates to the other things. So there's certainly the concept of least privilege, the concept of having your BCDR plan in place and testing it would be like the first foremost. And then I move into like what we've been talking about here outside of logging and monitoring, but is managed application control, is really focusing on what type of tools make exfiltration possible. And then moving into identifying these unknown accounts, rogue users, rogue systems, in a sense, that have the ability to create exfiltration opportunities. So focusing on business restoration and actually having that backup plan tested and ready to go and knowing that you have some sort of plan B. And then moving into application control, what is considered normal use of tools, even at the sysadmin side, and what sysadmins can be running those tools. And then putting yourself not in monitoring mode, maybe at first to see kind of what's being ran in your environment, but actually block mode, because now you can investigate. Because if you see something like Megasync being ran, you automatically will have some sort of user or identity you'll be able to look at. And then you can say, why is this account doing this? Is it considered normal? Or is this not a false positive, but an indicator that we potentially have an internal compromise that's already occurred? I guess that's 3. I gave you 3.
I think that's 3 good ones. And Andrew, you want to wrap us up? I think we're about at the top of the hour.
Yeah, it went way too quick. That's what I would, as I wrap it up. I want a real quick bonus question for Phyllis. Phyllis, as you hear this, do you think differently about the controls for version 9? Like how, you started in 8 with more in the cloud, right? Obviously. Will we see potentially more?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've gotten feedback like, our controls specifically addressing SaaS properly. Definitely we're going to have to take a look at that, and definitely more cloud specific to see, okay, just even down to like the basics, like is asset inventory, are we asking for the right things?
Well, exactly. I mean,
and
like, because Chip would argue identity, right? More than, should identity come first? I'm not saying you reorder, but to your point, like what's more important these days is we have this mass migration to the cloud, right, Chip? I mean, is that,
I mean, it's done.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah, right. There, it's done.
It's done. Yeah, I mean,
now,
definitely. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chip.
I was just gonna make the wise ass comment. Now that it's done, we only get over 35% MFA utilization across all sectors.
Well, right. I mean, and then there is that, and then there's the, oh, we've already defeated MFA, but it would be nice if people actually implemented MFA. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yes, we're defeating MFA, but then there's all those instances that attackers don't have to defeat MFA, right? And so, while maybe those don't make the headlines, I'm sure if we, talk to you three, that's still occurring. And so there is kind of like this balance of, we still have to bring people up, but of course we have to address the most recent things to stay relevant.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, I appreciate, Mac, thanks for coming on. It was awesome to have you. Appreciate you recommending this particular topic. It was really timely and topical, especially, like I said, with the Salesforce drift happening ironically in a very similar time frame. Chris, thanks for sitting in. Chip, thanks for sitting in as well. And Phyllis,
anytime, Andrew.
Seeing you. It was awesome job, man. We'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday. Take care. Be safe. Bye, guys.
Bye.